My worst gout attack lasted for probably 3 weeks. I was really bedridden during most of that time. I'd been to 4 or 5 different, and I asked that question multiple times. Is there anything I can do? And there's nothing you can do about it, and you can take this pill. Wasn't a very satisfying answer to me, but that was the answer to my question. And I took that medication for probably about 10, 12, I don't know, 13 years. I guess still at 55, I would guess people would think I was in fair health just to compare to the average population. But in reality, I was not. I had a number of issues, but one of them was gout. And that started in my mid 20s, probably fairly small. But as time progressed, those gout attacks just became more frequent and more severe. And so what originally was, I'd have a gout attack and that might be 6 months. All of a sudden, I was having them much more frequent to a point that probably in my mid 40s, I would guess, I was having a gout attack every 3, 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. And they got so severe that they really were debilitating. My worst gout attack lasted for probably 3 weeks. I was really bedridden during most of that time. If I got up at all, I had to be on crutches or just could not function. And again, not everyone has gout this severe, but mine actually I began to have developed gout in other joints in my body besides just my feet. I had, gout in my knees. I would get it in my fingers sometimes. Eventually, those attacks just continued to get worse, and I started to get it in my hands and my elbows. I do IT work for a living, and I couldn't type. I couldn't move a mouse. And at that point, I finally relented and started taking allopurinol, which is a gout medication. That probably was about 14, 15 years ago. I don't know the exact dates, but in that time frame. And I took that medication for probably about 10, 12, I don't know, 13 years, but a while, right? And it helped a lot. My gout attacks became less severe, but they never stopped. Sometimes I would still have a severe gout attack. Sometimes I'd still be on crutches or not be able to walk without a limp, but at least it helped a lot. I did everything. In fact, one of the things that the medical industry says is not to eat foods high in purine and those type of things. And I had cut down to where we ate meat once or twice a week, and nothing helped during that entire time. But the prospect that I never enjoyed the thought of was that I was going to have to take that for the rest of my life. And that's kind of where I was in life, and along with a number of other things. I weighed probably close to 275 pounds, had high blood pressure, prediabetes, and other minor things, chronic sinus infections that were really bad, and some other maladies in life. That's where I was until about four years ago or so in my life. I'd been to 4 or 5 different, and I asked that question multiple times. Is there anything I can do? The only advice was, well, you could lose some weight, and I was extremely overweight at that time, which may have helped. But when I started having my gout attacks, I wasn't overweight, and so it wasn't. Certainly, it would have helped me, help my gout, but I didn't tie the two together necessarily. But all of my questions about diet or anything I could do was, yeah, don't eat. You can stop, don't drink alcohol, maybe cut back on meat. But there was really the feeling I got was nothing, right? It's a genetic thing. There's nothing you can do about it, and you can take this pill, which wasn't a very satisfying answer to me. I always got the feeling that there was nothing I could do. It was just the luck of the draw, but we can give you a prescription. Probably 5 years ago, mostly because I wanted to lose weight. And I had tried, just like I tried everything for gout, I'd done all kinds of diets. I mean, from crazy stuff to, the more traditional types of things. And I had lost weight on some of those, in fact, but generally I was miserable during those times. I did Slim Fast at one particular stretch for about 6 months. I lost 40 some pounds during that time, but I was always starving. And, I hate to exercise, so I work at a desk. It's not like I'm super active. And even in regards to diet or weight loss, the advice was always the same: just eat less, right? Exercise and eat less. And I could do that for a while, but I never felt good. I was always hungry. And eventually you get off track even just a little bit, and immediately you just go right back into, the thing. A number of years ago, I read about intermittent fasting, and then I'd seen some videos by Dr. Jason Fung about intermittent fasting. And so I began to do that. I just still ate full crap. I just ate anything, but I would intermittent fast. And then later, I found out about the ketogenic diet, which I did, and I did have some success, but I still kind of fell into this trap about ketogenic foods, like, keto bread and keto candy bars and just marketing stuff, right? Which are still just processed foods. I got off track. And then finally, my wife found a video about the whole food keto. I mean, real food. And that's what we did. And we shortly after that really moved into predominantly animal based products. And that was it. And when I started doing that, it really, it changed my life in ways that I could have never imagined. I was not hungry and not starving. Like if I was hungry, I could eat as much as I wanted and I'd be full and I could just move on. And as long as I stayed away from processed food and sugar and high carb stuff, it was never really an issue for me. And I lost probably at my lightest, probably 120 pounds roughly. I weigh about just around 160 or a touch more right now. And probably at my heaviest was around 275. Maybe a month and a half. My morning blood sugar might still be around 100, but it would be almost the highest of the day, right? Yeah, my A1C. So my average blood sugar level dropped down into below 5, about 4.7, which gives you an average glucose reading of like 93 or something like that, in that range. So that was the very first thing that happened. My sinuses cleared up pretty well. I think a lot of that kind of chronic issue probably had to do with primarily probably grains and processed foods, and then just an excess of sugar. Those things resolved pretty quickly. My blood pressure took longer, but it did come down to more reasonable ranges fairly quickly within a few months, right? Even though I hadn't lost a huge amount of weight, it's just those things all began to get better. And then, my gout was actually one of the final things that probably resolved for me. And that was something I couldn't test all the time. I just kind of came upon the fact that I didn't really have gout attacks anymore. And finally, my prescription was due and I just didn't refill it. And I just stopped taking the medication. That was probably longer, probably 2 years, before that kind of thing happened. But, as I lost weight and I ate better, all of those things improved, some more slowly than others, obviously. So the doctor I currently go to is a really nice guy. And when I went to him, he did ask me about that. I said, look, I don't want you to fire me, right, as a patient, right, because I like you. But you may not like what I've been doing. And so I didn't say I only eat meat, but I did tell him I do extremely low carbs, right? And he said, so you're like not eating any carbs? I said, just rarely ever. I'm surprised because I've heard a lot of horror stories from other people that their doctors just like tear into them, like that's going to kill you. But my doctor actually he was totally receptive. He said, look, if that's what you've been doing and you've lost all of this weight, right? Everything looks good in your blood work, then if you want to do it, just keep doing it. He didn't care. Now, the one thing, though, he did tell me was when I came off my gout medication, I would have to go back on it. And so, again, it was this mindset that, my gout was a genetic thing and there was no way to get rid of it. So he said, you're going to have to go back on your gout medication or you're going to have bad gout attacks. The last visit to my doctor was about 15 or 16 months ago. So I have not gone back. I don't frequent the doctor, right? So I've not seen the doctor for about 15 months, but I also am not taking any gout medication. He suggested I did, and I just said I don't want to, but I'll see what happens. Generally, he was okay because, he probably thought I was a little loony, but it's hard to dispute with the results, right? Like all of those things were good. And so, what's he going to say? Well, go back to eating what you used to. I've heard many, many people mostly through comments on my channel that exactly what their doctors have told them. Like, you can't do that. It's going to kill you. And I get many comments like that as well from people. But again, my mindset has always been, if you think I was in better health, when I weighed 275 pounds, that somehow today I'm at risk of worse health outcomes than I was then. You just have to be crazy to believe it, right? Now my doctor did tell me I didn't have to continue that. If I didn't want to, I could, bring stuff back in. And I am not nearly as strict now as what I was probably during that time. But, I've been down to this weight for roughly 2 years, I would guess, something like that. So, it's perfectly fine for me. And as long as I'm in good health, I'm not sure why people have issues with eating that way, but a lot of people still do. In fact, sadly, I literally have comments on the Gal video that you've seen where someone basically said that there's no way what I said was true. They just said I'd made the whole story up and it was all a lie. And, I'm amazed by that type of attitude. But those people either, they believe that the only way to do something is what they've been told. Probably this person was a plant-based diet, I would guess, and they didn't think you could eat meat and survive or be healthy, that it was going to kill me and those types of things. But, it's just not the case. And I don't believe that it is probably the end all and cure all to all things, right? But I know that for me and for most of the people that I've spoken with, it is significantly better, right? And you have a much better shot at becoming healthy than you do with, you know, the standard advice that we get, which is just to eat less and to exercise more. Most people just can't sustain that. It doesn't work for the vast majority of people. And this gives people an option, like you mentioned earlier, hope of really reclaiming their life in many ways, right? People that have been confined to chairs, and I've interviewed a number of people as well that literally couldn't leave their house, right? And now, they still are not in great shape, but at least now they have lost enough weight to where they have hope that they can keep going, right? They literally hadn't been to a grocery store for years. And now, it's still hard for them because they still need to lose another 200 pounds, but they're able to function somewhat instead of just being trapped in their chair, literally with no hope at all. Yes, I still do eat almost exclusively animal based stuff. And so, what we generally eat, and my wife does this with me, which is awesome because it would be extremely hard if she did not. What we generally eat is beef a lot. We live in the country, we keep our own chicken, so we eat a lot of eggs, real cheese. I use full fat dairy if I use any. So I put heavy whipping cream in my coffee, bacon, which I really like. A usual meal for us will be, we may have eggs and omelet with bacon on the side, or, we'll have ground beef, or, we'll have some kind of steak if we can't afford to eat steak every day, or we would, but we'll have that type of thing. My wife still likes vegetables, and she will on occasion have low carb stuff, broccoli, or she'll still eat a salad or those types of things. But what we stay away from is, starchy kind of stuff. We don't really eat potatoes or those kinds of things, right? So that is mostly what we eat. Yeah, I intermittent fast, but not so much purposely now in the sense that I'm hungry, but I don't eat. But I still have a fairly small time of the day where I do eat. I will eat normally around noon or 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. I just eat when I get hungry. And then I will still often eat in the evening. And then the next day, I would just start again. In the beginning, I had to purposely do that, right? I would purposely not eat before noon. Now I just don't get hungry before noon, rarely ever. The only thing I do now more than we used to, is I am a little more laxed. Originally, when I was really working on losing weight, I would never eat anything that really wasn't in that category, except for on holidays or, special occasions, I might have something like that. I'm a little more laxed on that now. There are times when I will have something that isn't just once or twice a year. My daughter's not long ago, and she made a bunch of homemade stuff that was not exactly, ideal. But so I would eat that stuff. But I try to get back on track pretty quickly and not stray too long. And as long as I do that, I don't really have any issues. The only issue I do have is if I begin to eat those types of foods, I absolutely get hungry more and I crave them. So if I eat a cinnamon roll, I want another one. And I want to eat three then, and I want three more later. And if you do that very often, it's disastrous, right? So if I do eat carbs, it makes me hungry and it makes me crave them. And as long as I'm eating, meat and cheese and that type of stuff, I just eat when I get hungry. They're very happy that I'm in much better health. My wife had always been very small. And so, throughout our marriage, we've been married 32 years, and she had always been very small. And I was the one that gained a huge amount of weight. She had always told me she didn't care about my weight so much, but she, wanted me to be healthy. And of course, the two are kind of linked. You can't weigh 275 pounds and be healthy, and not at my height, at 5'6", unless you're some ripped muscle builder. So the weight is the issue, and in a lot of those areas. So she did it, which was a great thing because even though she didn't need to do it, she was willing to do it. And so she did it with me throughout that time. As things happened, I had other people begin to kind of dabble in that type of eating. We have 4 daughters, and our youngest 2 have both actually done this. They're all married, but the second youngest daughter, after her 4th child, actually did carnivore for a while and to lose weight afterwards, right? To get back down to her pre-pregnancy weight. So, and she did, and they're not very tall, but she got back down to 115 or 118 pounds. And my youngest daughter and her husband, Brett, who's in the Army, they don't just do all keto and carnivore, but they're young, healthy people that are active, right? But they all have become much more conscientious about what they put in their mouth. So they try to avoid seed oils. They try to limit the amount of processed foods. They focus much more on animal products, on good food, try to eat whole food. It's been awesome for me health wise. And it's also been good for them because they're at least much more aware of how food really does impact your health. And that's something that has been disconnected in our culture, that there's no relationship between that, right? I mean, at least not that much. We've just been taught or believe that any malady that comes upon us is all genetic. If you're fat, it's just genetic. If you got a bad heart, it's just genetic. If you have diabetes, it's just genetic. And there's nothing you can do about it. The flip side to that is if you can control it, then now it's your fault to some measure, right? And so now you have to accept responsibility. If I am overweight, it's because of what I'm doing. Or if I have, heart issues, it's because of what I'm doing. And so it's not totally black and white, but I think that we have much more control with the diet that we eat and the way that we live than what we've ever end up. And we can't maybe fix everything. And maybe we are not all going to live to be 120 because we eat right. But we have much greater chances of being healthy and productive and enjoying life if we do eat right than if we don't. And every specialist does their own little thing and recommends their own thing, and without much thought to what could be causing this. Like, yeah, there's something wrong with my kidneys, but why? And where did it begin? And what can I do? So much of that goes back to some type of issues with blood sugar, with glucose, some metabolic syndrome is the term that I'm looking for, because almost all of that stuff is caused by those things, right? By chronic inflammation and chronic glucose and insulin levels, being obese, all of that stuff, and stress and our mental state. And all of that stuff is impacted. And it's so much of it by how we eat, but no one wants to go back there to fix the issue. I don't go to the doctor a lot. And me and my wife talk about this. I like my doctor, and I think that the doctors are awesome. And if I break my arm, I want to find one, right? So he can fix my arm. If I cut myself open, I want some stitches. But what I don't like is that anything that's chronic is just always dealt with through medication. And I think they're great at fixing things that are acute. Something breaks, you cut, they fix it, and you're great. But those chronic conditions, those are the ones that they're not really fixing the condition. They give you something to kind of fight the symptoms without thought to how can we fix the actual problem. You don't fix a headache by just, popping ibuprofen all day. Well, you can in the pain will go away, but it doesn't fix what caused the problem, right? I hope that there's a shift. I know there is at least some shift amongst some doctors here in the U.S. and I think in other places as well. But I think that there's so many constraints because so many of those doctors aren't private doctors now. They work in some type of healthcare system. So there's insurance, there's all of these things where if a doctor doesn't offer you a prescription for high cholesterol, all of a sudden now he's liable for, liability lawsuits, or he's going to get fired from the health network that he works in. But at least some doctors have begun to look at a person and say, look, if you have metabolic issues, let's try to fix that. And if we can through diet, then probably a lot of these other issues can be fixed as well. My hope is that continues, but I think it's a great challenge for them. And, unless you find one of those doctors, what are you going to do? There's more than there ever was, but still not a lot in comparison to the number of doctors out there. I'll tell you, one of the great pieces of advice, which I've heard multiple times from Dr. Ken Berry, who's a family doctor in Tennessee, and that is, you've eaten however you've eaten for decades, maybe. Doing real whole food keto or carnivore for 90 days is not going to kill you, but it might save you. I just encourage people, look, you've tried everything, and I can relate to that because I have. And every time you fail, it's so hard to find the motivation to start again. And you feel like a failure, you just can't kind of find it in yourself to do it again. But if you can, and you're going to try something that you've not tried before, try to do keto, try to do carnivore, try it for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. It really is going to make a difference. If I live a different life today than I would have, the vast majority of people, it is absolutely life-changing. I mean, I live a different life today than I would have if I had not done it. In my health, in my weight, the things that I've done, I wouldn't be speaking with you. I would never done a YouTube video. All of those things are radically different because of this, just because I changed the way that I eat. It just gives a person at least some glimmer of hope that maybe they can do something when they've always been told they can't.